two friends taking pictures of the rising full moon on a summer night.
Two teenage kids doing what teenage kids do.
When a stranger with a gun and a death wish changed everything.
It was violent, it was senseless, and I will never understand it, I will never accept it.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and unfortunately, we're all too familiar with stories about how violence shatters lives. But what we rarely see is how they are rebuilt. In a new podcast, The Letter, we relive tragedy, but only so we can hear the rest of the story. The struggle to reclaim lives, the realities of grief, and the possibilities of forgiveness.
I believe in miracles. Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are, and this is a big one.
Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, about recovery. I'm Casey Scott, and if you know somebody who needs some help, have them do what I did and give Pinnacle Recovery Center a call. They'll get you on your road to recovery just like they did me. Hey, Dr. Matt.
How you doing?
What's going on?
I'm just trying to keep up with you. You're all fired up and ready to go today.
I'm feeling good.
I can tell.
Let me ask you this. Do therapists have therapists?
Yeah, a lot of the times they do, yeah.
Because I have imagined, since I've been emerged in this world of recovery and addiction, and we'll ask our guest about this a little bit later, but most of the conversations are heavy. And
it can be.
And it's a lot of heavy stuff. You're seeing people at the worst time in their lives, and you're trying to help them. And that's the cathartic part of that is, helping them out. But
Sure.
You are hearing some heavy stories. And I imagine as a therapist, it's a heavy day.
It definitely can be. Therapists specialize in different types of treatment and different reasons why a person's coming in. And definitely if you're a therapist that works in addiction and recovery, you're going to hear a lot of heavy stuff. Depends. Yeah, it just depends.
I was just curious because I want to know how you keep it all together, because from your hair to your shoes, you're put together.
Oh, hey, thanks, brother. You know what? I will have to say I do a lot of anxiety disorder work. And so it's not, I have trauma patients and addiction patients, but on days where I'm doing a lot of anxiety work, it's kind of fun because it's almost like going to the gym. We're retraining people how to think and act and behave. And then I do a lot of stuff for myself. Like I skateboard and go ride my motorcycle and
you meditate.
Hang out with my kids. I meditate twice a day. So I do a lot of things to try to take care of myself. And because I
often heard that marriage counselors or therapists are divorced.
Yeah.
Majority of them are. And I was like,
I am. Hit that cliche. It's funny. That is the cliche. I looked it up when I was getting divorced because I felt like a cliche, to be honest with you. I was embarrassed about that. And it turns out that the therapists in general aren't divorced at any higher rate than anybody else. It's hovering a little below 50%. But it feels more like you should be able to keep your marriage together if you're a therapist, right?
I heard from this one comedian, and he said, 50% of Americans are divorced.
Yeah.
And, Einstein was divorced.
Right.
And so when you're getting married, they should really say, are you smarter than Einstein?
Because otherwise you're in trouble.
If Einstein can't keep it together, how do we have any hope?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess you and I are in good company then.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're with Einstein.
Hanging with Einstein.
Yeah, that's all right.
Equals MC squared.
Right on.
That'd be my rap name.
That'd be a good one.
Hey, Project Recovery is all about sharing stories, and if you've got a story you'd like to share, you can always hit us up on our social. We've got Facebook, we've got Instagram, and you can even go to KSLTV.com.
Right.
We're only as good as the stories we're telling, and luckily, we've had some amazing stories.
The stories are great. People are so willing to share. And you know what? The stories are therapeutic. From a therapy point of view, being able to connect with somebody else, hear what they've gone through. I've talked about this before, way back in the day when I used to do radio. People would call in and say, I'd say something, people struggle with this or that. They'd call and say, I thought I was the only one that did that. And just by knowing that other people are going through sometimes exactly what you're going through, at least very close to what you're going through, helps you feel connected and supported, and people are more likely to get help. So I'm excited to share the stories we share on this show, because it appears from the feedback we're getting that it's encouraging people to get help, get support, reach out to other people, be honest with their friends and family about what they're going through. So the stories are kind of at the heart of, I think, the therapeutic aspect of this show.
I have had people come up to me and say, how do you keep getting an amazing story after an amazing story? Are you out there searching for them? And I want to say to them, you know what? There's amazing stories happening to everybody and all kinds of people every day. And if you'll just listen and open your heart, they're happening all around you all the time.
Oh, yeah. Life is drama. I mean, we all go through strange stuff. We all go through interesting things. A lot of people just keep it to themselves and they don't share it. And so when we have a venue like this where we can share people's intimate stories, and man, I've been impressed with almost every one of our guests has been so open and so straightforward with us about kind of what they're going through. That's what makes it a great story, is honesty.
And speaking of amazing and great stories, we have one coming up right now. His name is Rob Eastman, and I owe him a thank you, and I'm a little bit mad at him. Yesterday,
he's a big guy.
Look at him.
Are you going to get? I wouldn't get too mad at him.
No, well, here's the deal. So he's got a podcast, and Rob, what's the name of your podcast?
It's called the Stand and Fight Podcast.
And he called me and says, "Hey, would you come and do my podcast?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll come and do it." And I said, "But what's your program?" And he does this workout, and we're going to find out more about it at the end of the podcast. But I was like, "Hey, let me come and do this workout with you, and then I'll do your podcast so I kind of know where you're coming from." Mm-hmm. So he goes, "Great. We start at 6." And I said, "In the morning?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "I don't know if Uber goes that early, but I'll give it a shot."
Yeah.
And so I show up at 6 o'clock. He's got this nice facility right in Centerville. And he goes, "Okay, we're ready to do this." And I said, "I got a fake hip. I don't know what I can do." And he goes, "Well, just do it to the best of your ability."
Oh, yeah. I forgot about your fake hip.
Yeah. And so what was the workout we did?
You just do a transfer from 20 squats and 1 sit-up, and then 19 squats, 2 sit-ups, and you just transfer to where you end up doing 1 squat and 20 sit-ups, and then run a mile at the end, which if you break it up like that, the psychology, people don't see the number, but it ends up being 210 of each.
Wow.
And after 210 air squats and then trying to run a mile, that in itself is a chore.
And I got
at 6 in the morning.
Yeah, I got to say, I did it, and
Nice.
it was great for me because I didn't think I could run anymore, and it pushed me to do something that was out of my comfort zone, and it really felt great. Today, not so good.
So this was yesterday.
Yesterday, it felt amazing.
Right. Today you woke up sore.
Yeah, I'm walking around like a doo-doo in my pants.
Day 2 is always worse.
Yeah, it's miserable. But I got the chance to share my story on your podcast, but your story is amazing. So let's jump into the nuts and bolts of it. Rob, tell us your story.
Sounds good. I was born and raised in Bountiful, Utah. Anybody that's from Davis County knows we got a special little bubble going on there. And I felt pretty normal until I got to school. And once I found out not everybody or everybody else could sit in their seats for a long amount of time and I couldn't, I was getting in trouble a lot.
Now, was this elementary school?
Yeah.
That you noticed this?
Kindergarten. I was in and out of the principal's office quite often. And then in the first grade, we had a teacher that was pretty amazing and kind of specialized in that. So they got
one
me
of those squirrely kids that had a hard time sitting still, and you're
before
lots
they
of
knew,
energy. And
before they knew what ADHD was,
Yeah.
I was that kid. I was the poster child for that. So I started going to the doctors like once or twice a week, and I'd get with my friends and be like, "Hey, what do you guys do at the doctors?" And they're like, "Well, I don't go to the doctor." So right then, I'm kind of insecure. Like, well, why do I have to go? And then in the second grade, they started giving me Ritalin. And in the second grade, I was acting out, and the teacher brought me up in front of the class and said, "Robbie, why can't you sit still like everybody else? Take your pill and sit down." And the whole class laughed at me.
Shaming.
That was that.
Yeah.
I knew that if they were laughing, they must not have to take pills. They might not have to do that. And as a little kid, being red hair, big ears, I got bullied from day one. Second I walked into school and as a kindergartner, I got in a physical fight or called names on a daily basis.
Because kids are mean.
Yeah.
I mean, they are. They can be, I should say.
Yeah. So add to being different, I just felt super insecure, and I didn't want to take pills ever again. So I'd fake take it, put it in my mouth, spit it out, whatever I needed to do. And it got to the point where the pain inside of me was so bad. starting to believe the bullies, that it was in the 3rd grade that I developed my first suicidal thought. And back in the 80s.
It's pretty young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know you could actually kill yourself. And I just knew that I felt tons of pain, and it was because of these people, and the next person that caused any pain to me, they were going to feel some pain back. So I started fighting. And didn't care how big you were, what grade you were in. I was going to scratch you, kick you. I didn't care what it was, and give back a little pain, which in return caused more problems, right? Then I was getting in trouble, getting principal's office more. But then the bigger problem was I would take that home, and anybody smaller than me, I would become the bully. And I know I hurt a lot of people in my neighborhood, and it was just out of pain. I didn't want to hurt anybody, and I felt different so much. And like you were saying before, I didn't think anybody understood how I felt. And so thinking about death, not knowing anything really about it, started to get some weird behaviors and developed deep depression, and got into junior high. I was always a high-level soccer player. So that was really the only time that I was the cool kid.
Where you shined.
Yeah. Yeah, I started playing comp from 8 years old. They basically kicked me off the rec team because I would score 12 goals in a game and nobody else would get the ball. And so,
do you think your parents put you into soccer to kind of channel that energy that you had? Was there a method to it, or they just knew you excelled in it and gave you that opportunity?
I bet they put me into anything they could. I was a wild child. My mom always jokes about it, but she tells my daughter, she says, "Your dad was so wild. One time the neighbor called and said, 'Do you know where Robbie is?' And she said, 'Yeah, he's right here.' She's like, 'No, Claudette, he's not. He's on the roof in a diaper and cowboy boots.'" And I was like 3. And my daughter thinks that's so funny, but I was...
It's pretty funny.
To get down to one of how sick and scared as a little kid I was, my sisters were picking on me. And I got so mad that I grabbed a butcher knife, and they locked themselves in the bathroom, and I cut like a 1-foot hole in the door. I was going to kill them all.
Whoa.
And it was just, I felt misunderstood. I was almost corralled like an animal. My parents are great, right? But you got a wild little kid that nothing soothes them. And so I was struggling. And
I'll just pause, just as a developmental psychologist point of view. Those are some very formative years in how a person sees themselves. And so as you were wondering, how do other people see me, trying to deal with the pain and feelings inside, unfortunately, that's a time when a person starts to think certain ways about themselves. And that can develop into a lot of self-hatred, and that fuels those thoughts of suicide, feelings of depression, feelings of alienation, insecurities. I'm not good enough. Why don't people like me? And that's a really rough time to go year after year feeling that way, because how we think about ourselves, the foundation of that is starting at that age.
Yeah. So I would tell them, my parents, whatever, I'm being bullied, and there's really not much that anybody did back in the day. And I was running track. It was like my 6th grade year. We were over at Viewmont High School, and I was always the fastest guy. And I just got done winning the 100-meter and the 200-meter, and I'm walking off, and some guy in the stands yells, "If your ears weren't so big, you would have lapped them." And my dad heard that, and he's just like lost it. And he's like, "Man, we need to get your ears fixed." So I went in and I got surgery, and they pinned my ears back. A lot of redheads, and some people, there's just a fold on the side of your ear that just doesn't develop. Not a big deal. They fixed that, and I get into junior high, and by that time I call myself like I was a Swiss Army knife. I had so many masks. I got really good at fitting in, pretending to be things I wasn't. And after 12 years of being told you're ugly, stupid, you should die, all these things, I started believing it, and it just became easier to people please and fit in. And then I'd go home and I'd be so empty inside, I just want to be by myself. And it was in the 9th grade. I had a gun, and I was at a party, and I just got to the point where I felt like I wanted to die. So I started playing Russian roulette, and it really freaked the kids out. And they called the cops, and the cops came and got me, took me to my dad's house, or my parents' house, and my dad took me into the garage and put the gun on the ground and smashed it into a million pieces, and he kind of got in my face. He said, I grew up, I didn't have any grandparents. I didn't even know really what that was. And he asked me if I knew why I didn't have grandparents, and I didn't. And my great-grandfather and my grandmother all committed suicide. And my grandfather drove his truck off of a bridge. And I saw some serious hurt in my dad, and he looked at me and he said, if you kill yourself, I'm going to kill myself.
Had you ever seen that in your dad's face before?
No, my dad was he was of service to his community and just had it all figured out. And
some people might know who your dad was.
Yeah, Dan Eastman. He was a senator, school board president, and so he was an amazing man, successful in all areas of life. And I was that one thing that he just couldn't figure out. So he when he saw me in pain, and he knew that pain from his mother, from his father, and down the line, he didn't know how else to handle it. And so in my mind, I love my dad. Last thing I want is for him to die. So, and
he said that. He said, if you kill yourself, I
won't be able to handle it. Yeah. I'll kill myself.
And how did that affect you? I mean,
it was it kind of took me back. Like I'm not doing this to hurt anybody else. So I'm like, man, I got to figure out a different way. And I had this poster on my ceiling of Kurt Cobain, and it says, I hate myself, I want to die. Most people have Michael Jordan back in the day, or Karl Malone, or things like that. But I would just lay there and just.
I had Pam Anderson.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
And so when there's enough emotional pain,
but you were connecting with that message and with that person. Like a lot of us like Kurt Cobain's music, but that message on that poster is really telling of. Like you went to the trouble of pinning that up in your room. That really was something as a teenager you were connecting with that feeling.
Yeah, and then obviously your associations. I surrounded myself with a bunch of people who felt the same way.
Yeah,
and eventually, with that much pain in my life and feeling that way, I had to numb out some way. It's either the gun or numb out. And I think it was my sophomore year. I promised my mom, because we're LDS, don't smoke and don't drink, right? Those are the things. And so somebody had acid. I'm like, it's just a piece of paper, right? And I took acid for the first time, and it took me to another place. And the pain went away for a minute, and that just opened the door to weed, pills, drinking. And that stuff worked really well as an antidepressant for a while.
So up until your sophomore year in high school, you were relatively substance abuse free.
Yeah. Well, let me back up. So I was sitting there, and this comes back to news and things like that and staying aware, right? So I'm sitting there watching TV with my dad, and a news thing comes on, and it's talking about an NFL player who just failed his drug test for abusing Ritalin. And I was like, I wonder if that Ritalin, it's been like 4 years. I bet it's still in the cupboard. So I went and popped like 4, and that was really the first time I hallucinated. It was probably like 8th or 9th grade. And that scared me. I also had a Bart Simpson poster, and his cape was waving at me, and I had my church clothes turned sideways in the closet, because it was next day was Sunday, and it looked like somebody was hanging in my closet. So that tripped me out.
So, yeah, you're definitely hallucinating.
But so that opened up a whole can of worms deal. And then weed was, it's pretty mild when you start, and it takes it away, and you smoke a little bit, and then you got to smoke a little bit more, and then you got to smoke a lot, and then eventually you can't afford to buy as much as you need to smoke to numb out. Then you got to add alcohol, and then you got to add pills. And I made a girlfriend whose dad was a doctor, and my birthday present was usually a shoebox full of samples, and and it just kind of continued. And then I hurt my ankle in a soccer game, and I took some Percocet, and I ended up scoring 3 goals. Must have been the pills, so I just started associating everything I did, playing hockey, playing soccer. I needed to be intoxicated in some way.
You're listening to Project Recovery. More from Rob coming up.
It's the story of an American held in a dark Venezuelan prison.
Then all of a sudden they all kind of lined up. They pointed their guns at me. And this is the point where I thought, I'm going to die today.
I'm Becky Bruce. I spent a year working on Hope in Darkness, which now has more than 2 million downloads. Find it on kslpodcast.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
So pretty quickly, just within a year or two, you had become what we call a polysubstance abuser. Like whatever you could get your hands on, it sounds like you were using.
Yeah, the pain came back quick. And then I think I drank alcoholically from the very first time. We went up in North Canyon, and me and one of my really good Mormon friends were like, let's try one. And I don't know how in my mind it felt different that if we shared it, it wasn't as bad. We shared like an 18-pack. But we just share half a can, so it wasn't a big deal. We're like, how many halves did we drink? Pretty much blacked out the first time, and then drank to get loaded every time from there on out.
Through your drug use and alcohol, were there ever any signs to the family members or friends?
Yeah, I mean, again, growing up in Davis County, people don't talk about that stuff. There was one guy in our neighborhood that was like famous because he was a drug addict, and it was the Browns or whatever he was the guy. Nobody talked about that. I didn't know what rehab was. I didn't know what AA was till I was like 27. So
you really hadn't had any education on
no.
Your first time abusing Adderall, you took 4 Adderall. As soon as you said that, I thought, oh my gosh, that's real dangerous, right? And so you didn't have any education, so you were just experimenting, but in kind of seclusion, in private.
Yeah. And then getting into high school, because of the bullying, I became a pretty good fighter by the time I got to high school. So I sought that out a lot, and we drank a lot, and the emotion, the bipolar activity, the anxieties, all of those things, and pretending to be something I wasn't, and the success of my father and the lack of success. I was not a good student. The only time I'd get a 2.0 was during soccer season because I had to, and I'd go spend 3 or 4 hours with a, what do they call him?
Tutor?
The tutor who I'd eventually convinced to do my work for me, and so I could get the grades. And then,
was that something on your mind? Like, was your dad a senator yet at that point?
No, he was the school board president.
But he's a school board president.
He owned a Jeep dealership, and very successful.
Was that ever did you ever worry? Do you think that highlighted your behavior? Did people notice you more because of your dad's status? Davis County is still kind of a small place, but definitely back then.
Yeah, it definitely did. But back then, in my ego, they were afraid to do anything. So I'd walk into a stomp at Bountiful High. The cop would take my keys, and he would give me a sobriety test at the end to give me my keys back.
Oh, really?
So it's like they were allowing. The cops would come into a party, they'd see me, they'd shuffle me out the back door and take me home. At that age.
So sort of you got protected a little bit from big consequences.
Yeah. Then, once I graduated, it was the opposite. If I get a DUI, it made the front page of the news. Senator's son. My dad got appointed the new DUI chairman. That same night I got a DUI, he had to step down from that.
Wow.
So he's up here achieving all of these great things and making a difference, and I'm like just the complete opposite and making a mess of our family name. And nothing I did was quiet. When I went out, it was a scene.
Do you think you did that purposely?
I think I did it because I felt untouchable. And even if when I did get busted, before the tires even stopped on the cop car, I was bailed out. I never had to sit in the pain.
Yeah.
It was always like, I'll never do it again. I'm apologetic and dealing with that. And for parents, it's scary. They don't want their kid to be hurting, but they also don't want their name to be smeared. They don't want anybody to know.
Yeah.
And I never had any real consequences, any major anything until I was 27. And I'd been married, and let's rewind a little bit. My best friend killed himself when we were 19, and that threw me for a loop, and I got real sick, and that's when I got into cocaine, meth, and just added. So I'm taking pills, drinking, Oxycontin like crazy, crystal meth, cocaine, pretty much on a weekly basis.
Whoa.
So going out, my dad's supplying me with jobs, giving me manager positions and things where he just wanted me to commit to something. And the only way I would go there, my ego was so big that I needed a cool name. And
so your dad was trying to do what he thought was best.
Yeah. He didn't really he supplied me with cars and things, we own a car dealership, but he tried to provide me with opportunity to learn. I was just a punk.
He was probably hoping you'd connect with one of those opportunities, and that would become more important to you, and you'd feel the pride of working.
Yeah.
But for you, it was more just a status thing.
Yeah. So he placed me with a different guy who he thought might be able to change me, and have them teach me the ways, and I wouldn't. I'd show up late. I would get high in the bathroom, and really just screwed up a lot of opportunity. And then all my friends were getting married, and then I got married, and that lasted like 6 months. And shortly after the divorce, a couple of my friends died, and I went to one's funeral, and now I'm into coke and heroin, and I'm shooting. And
how did your friends die?
Overdose.
So
I'm at one, and I got the first one that passed away. I couldn't really do anything. My philosophy was I can't go to work unless I'm high, but then I'd get so high I couldn't go to work. So I was getting high because I couldn't feel the anxiety going to my friend's death, and I got so high I didn't make it to the funeral. Then like 2 weeks later, the other one died. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And so I numbed out, and we made it to that one. But when I walked in the funeral and I'm looking at, or the viewing, and seeing the girlfriend and the mom and the dad and the brothers standing over the casket, it was like God removed all of my numbing agents and made me feel everything in that moment. It was so scary. It was fearful. It was like I knew I needed something to change. And I had just bought like $500 or $600 worth of coke and heroin, and I owned a concrete company at the time, and drove down to my shop in North Salt Lake with a kid that I was with, and started getting rid of all my drugs and needles and everything. And I needed to shoot up one more time, and I called, and I got into Circle Lodge, and they couldn't get me until Wednesday, and it's like a Monday, and I didn't want to get sick on Tuesday, so I shot up one more time. And that's all I remember. And the kid said I came out and was sweating like crazy, and I had a convulsion, and I threw myself back, and my head hit the concrete, and he came over to check on me, and I had blood coming out of both ears, both nose, and out of my mouth. And he checked to see if I was alive, and my heart had stopped, and I wasn't breathing. And he decided to bail because he didn't want to get in trouble.
So he left you on the ground.
On the ground. He said he got down the road a little bit and felt guilty, and put in an anonymous call to the police and told them what had happened and where it had happened. So they came down, kicked the door in, and they worked on me for 25 minutes to get me going again, and rushed me up to Lakeview Hospital, where they found that I had a bleeding on the brain. And so they needed to rush me up to the U of U, where I spent about 7 days in a coma. And when I got out, my mom was sitting there, and I didn't know what had happened or anything. I've got the breathing tube down my throat, and at this time, you guys see me, I'm at about 190 pounds. I weighed 128 pounds. I was skin and bones, black and blue arms from shooting up so much. And just to let people know how sick addiction can be, I spent about another 7 days in there until they felt I was strong enough to leave. And I convinced my mom, and they left the breathing tube in the whole time. Like I wasn't strong enough to breathe on my own. And I convinced my mom to leave, and I had this friend that I knew I could tell her just about anything, and she'd believe me. And I told her to come and pick me up from the hospital, and that I needed to drive to a customer's house to get a contract signed. It was no more than 20 minutes of them unhooking me from everything in ICU that I was at my drug dealer's house again.
Whoa.
Because while I was in there, they were killing the pain with whatever they were putting in the syringe, but it wasn't coke and it wasn't heroin. So I'm having these other withdrawals on top of these other things. And luckily my family stayed on me, and about 2 weeks later I got into rehab. And I went through that, and that was the first interaction I'd ever had with anything recovery.
But you said before you overdosed on the ground that you knew something needed to change.
Yeah.
So you knew you were in a bad way.
Yeah. I was ready. I was ready to quit, but I didn't want to get sick, so I shot up one more time.
And a lot of people say that. I mean, that's a story that's pretty common. One more time, one more time.
Yeah. So it was either laced with something or pure or, it wasn't any different. It was just that time. And so here I am in rehab and were
you up at the Cirque Lodge? Is that where you were?
I was at the studio, which is just up there in the mouth of the canyon. And I thought I was rich, and I was by far the poorest dude in there. But sitting in there and learning all about the things that I'd known in my heart and that I was seeing and wasn't matching up with the people around me, like, just get better, just be happy, just be like, I didn't know why I couldn't do that. So as I'm sitting there and there's some therapists and some other people sharing the same stories, I'm like, finally like, oh my gosh, okay, I'm not alone.
The same stories that you finally related to,
Yeah.
so that you were meeting people that felt like you'd felt.
Yeah. And
in your youth, did you ever talk to that with your friends? Did any of your friends feel the same way?
I was the guy that I was telling you yesterday that it's pretty hard to have your drug dealer cut you off. Like, people, my friends, my last few years of using, nobody dared be with me. I'd be shooting up while driving down the freeway.
Wow.
Like, I was a dangerous, in that sense. I'm not out killing people, but I could have, in my car. Like, I couldn't go 15 or 20 minutes without putting something into my system.
It sounds like ever since a young child, whatever you did, it was extreme.
Yeah.
You're on the roof in diapers, in cowboy boots, or whether it was soccer or fighting,
Yeah.
or now your drug use had become so extreme, pushing these limits that even the drug dealer didn't want to be around you, huh?
Yeah. So at that point, I'm by myself. I'm going to all extreme limits to find drugs. Once I could sit safely in rehab and just work on myself, I felt good. The structure, like, I think I would have killed it in the military for sure. Having that structure and physical outlet, working out again and all of those things and having some positive interaction each day. So I get out of there and I start training again. I start playing soccer again. My life is good. I build my business back up and meet this girl. She's LDS. That's what my parents always wanted for me. And we're dating. Things are going good. And
you're about how old at this age?
27. No, I think I was probably about 28 now, coming out of that. And I don't know if anybody else understands this feeling, but I'm in love, and I'm definitely not in love with God at this point. I figure if there's a God, he's not a very nice person to allow me to go through so much crap. So I'm pretty much hate God. And we're dating and stuff, and she's like, well, we're getting married in the temple. And I was like, what? Like, no, I hate the church. I hate the people of the church. They judge me. They're not like me. I don't want to be anything like them. And I'm like trying to find a way out of it. And I'm like, all right, I'll take the missionary discussions. So I pretty much give me a couple weeks so I can talk her out of it. And women have that magic voodoo, so I ended up getting married in the temple. And
isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth?
Shortly,
so I ended up getting married in the temple, he says.
Yep.
Shortly after that, I was doing all the things they taught me in rehab, like repair your relationships and take care of your body. But the one thing I didn't do was forgive myself.
And that's the toughest.
And I didn't work on the relapse plan. So I was at the Woods Cross indoor soccer place, and I blew my ACL. And I'm in the hospital, literally biting on a tongue suppressor, like that Joseph Smith story where he's, biting on. I'm like, I'm tough. I'm in recovery. I don't need any medicine. And they're like, do the MRI, and they're like, yeah, you blew your ACL. We're going to need to do surgery. So I'm working with my doctor, and I guess I shouldn't say I was sober because back then I was on Suboxone, which we thought was sober. And
I don't know what Suboxone is.
So it's just it's it blocks your sensors. It tricks you into believing that you're getting what you need, and it's a synthetic opiate. So it's a better alternative to heroin or opiates, and we're finding probably that it's not much of a...
The original idea was to help people come off of the opiates,
like methadone,
and
which was a flop.
And now we're finding that people can have problems with it in similar ways to other drugs. But, it's one of those things that was a good idea.
So my doctor's plan was, I'm really worried about this. Like, if I get pain pills, he's like, look, we'll just take extra Suboxone. Instead of taking 2, take 5, and we'll get through it. Rather than support system, rather than have your therapist call, all these things that I should, life skill stuff that we're missing big time when we bring pharmaceuticals into it. So now I've built close to a $500,000 home down in Foxborough. My business is doing well. I'm married. And and I've been clean for 18 months, everything but Suboxone. The second that nerve block wore off, I was in so much pain that I didn't know what to do. My wife calls in the brothers, or the brethren, and they come give me a blessing. And that didn't work. And as soon as she went to work, I called the old number to my drug dealer, and he was still had the same number, and I had a needle in my arm within an hour.
So you went right back to heroin.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, that's an interesting that's an interesting mindset, because just a few days before, you were trying to talk your doc out of prescribing opiates. Like, you were very much aware of the danger they could be to you, but as soon as that pain hit full force, you jumped straight back.
So tell
me about that decision to do that.
So a lot of people get in recovery and just think about don't do the drug part, but I didn't repair the pain part. Right? I didn't know why in the first place, the emotional pain. Anytime I felt any pain of any kind, it triggered that response. And after 20 years, maybe from the age of 7 up, I started finding bad coping skills to deal with it. It was just like, if you hear the fire alarm, what do? You hit the exit.
Yeah.
So the second that immense pain, my coping skill was dope. There was no voice on my shoulder saying, don't do that. It was like, bring needles. Call the pizza man, have him bring a keg of beer, and it was scary how easily it wasn't even a factor.
So as you reflect back on that whole process, if I understand what you're saying, you had some successful treatment in the sense that it got you sober, and you sounds like you did a lot of education. You learned more about the drugs and what they were doing to you, and you're connecting with other people and hearing their stories. But as far as getting really down to the heart of it, to the source, the emotional pain and physical pain, and what maybe led you to use in the first place, that hadn't happened yet.
Yeah, it's the self-love. I had so much self-hatred still, and
that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Those early formative years for kids, we discount. It sounds trite almost, like how you think about yourself, but that's one of the most important things that determines our futures, is how we think about ourselves, what we believe about who we are, who Casey believes who he is, who I believe I am. Those things determine what we feel like we can do. And if you have all that, that's why bullying and those sorts of experiences that you described as a kid are so insidious. They develop a sense of, I must be wrong and different. And so, like you said, no self-love, a lot of criticism, a lot of self-deprecation.
Yeah. And it's like, hopefully some people on here hear me. I always, if somebody says, I knew you from high school, my first response is, I'm sorry if I did anything. And it's funny, but it's not. Like, I hated the bullying, and in return, when I got stronger, I became the bully. And I hurt a lot of people, and it was out of my own pain.
Yeah.
And who knows what that did to them down the road.
Have you ever had any good experiences with that when you've been able to apologize to somebody?
Yeah. I have. That's awesome. A lot, because now I work in the schools, and parents will see me like, what are you doing here? Why are you coaching? You were a dick.
Yeah.
And I'm like, rather than get mad, you know what, I was. And however I hurt you, I'd like to talk about it.
And you've been able to smooth some things. That's great. Yeah. That's wonderful.
And a lot of people say they can't get sober or they can't get clean and sober where they got messed up. And for me, the first 9 months of my sobriety, on my second deal, so we got through all that, and the marriage, my relapse lasted like 6 months before my wife walked in and caught me with a needle in my arm, and I was shooting Suboxone.
Mm-hmm.
So she'd been begging me or talking to me about having a kid. And in my head, I'm like, and I didn't want a kid. And in my head, I'm thinking, okay, if I get her pregnant, she'll be worried about having the kid, and that'll give me some extra time to be over here doing my drugs. So we worked on having a baby, and told her that I'd quit and work on that. And the day came that we were going to go get a pregnancy test. And I hadn't got drugs that day. I'd gotten really good at hiding it. And my drug dealer, as we were pulling into the driveway, texted me. He's like, I just picked up. And so I was like, hey, I just got to run to my friend's house real quick. And she knew right off the bat. She's like, if you leave, don't ever come back. And I was like, later.
Left.
Oh, yeah.
So your addiction brain was so in full force at that point. You were thinking, I can use more if my wife's pregnant. Mm-hmm. And then when she threw out the ultimatum, you chose the drugs. Yeah.
In that moment, it was like, I'm going to have to go in there. If she's pregnant, it's going to be this special moment. I'm getting sick. It won't be that special. I'm going to be ornery. I need to go get high so that I can at least pretend to enjoy this moment. Mm-hmm. I don't want to ruin it for her. But in that moment, I was like, see ya. So I went and I got high, and I got a phone call about 30 minutes later saying, come home. And I came home, and I walked in, and the stairs go right up from the front door, and she was sitting there bawling. And that's how I found out I was going to be a dad.